What's up, everybody? I'm Thomas J. Bellezza, and welcome to another episode of the Right Mindset podcast, where we interview authors, publishers, and other people in the industry, including agents, to really go over the process of the craft, the industry itself through their experiences. And of course, maybe we talk about some topics of the day. Who knows? But I have a guest for you, a very special returning guest. I'd like to introduce Dakota Rayne. Please tell the audience a little bit about you before we get started.
Well, hi, everybody. I am Dakota Rayne, and I am the CFO of WriteHive, which is a really cool nonprofit if you are looking to develop your writing skills, learn more about the industry, kind of get your feet wet into a different community that's really all about lifting you up and, improving your writing skills, whether they're for hobby or self-publish or agent subs. I'm also the CEO of Inked and Gray, which is a small indie press company that looks to lift up the stories of marginalized creators and publish them out into the world.
Now, that's pretty awesome. So you have the nonprofit and you have the for-profit, which is Make
Yep.
Me Money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Could we talk about those concepts a little bit? And
Absolutely.
all right, so the nonprofit, did you go the 501 route
Yep.
or excellent for someone who might be out there who has a mission and wants to do something with a nonprofit? Without going into, because I know it is a complex process with with accountants, lawyers, etc., paperwork. But what is some advice you could give to somebody that was interested in going that route?
Like starting a nonprofit?
Yeah, starting a nonprofit, like like take away the learning curve a little bit for them.
I would advocate first either getting a mentor or getting involved with a current nonprofit that you're interested in. A lot of the small grassroots nonprofits like WriteHive will, if you're looking for, hey, I just kind of want to pick your brain about, how you started and your kind of, what did you get into it? Any advice? I mean, personally, I think a lot of nonprofits are happy to reach out and, give you a little bit of advice, maybe mentorship, things like that. But definitely get involved with a nonprofit first, see how they work, start networking. I mean, most individuals working in a nonprofit are happy to kind of sit down with you and go, this is what I do, and this is what my role is, and this is how all the other kind of roles interact and everything. So I would just get into the community, find out what, find a nonprofit that fits something that you're passionate about as well, even if it's not the nonprofit that you're wishing to start, but something also that you are passionate about, so that you can kind of get hands-on as to what goes on at the bottom level, and as well as what goes on, at the top level, and kind of see how all the pieces fit together, because you may say, hey, I like the way this structures because these are the components that they have and I like those. Or I don't like those, and this is something that I would do differently. And a lot of mentors and individuals who have started nonprofits can also kind of point you in the right direction for all the other paperwork and stuff that is a very big learning curve.
And as that is great advice, especially because you want to get involved. Even as an author, you want to get involved with your community because it's not
Mhm.
a every person's an island kind of mentality. It's really about the people around you. Especially once you go, well, it's just about my book. Well, you got to tell someone about your book. Somebody
Mhm.
has to believe in your book. You have to have a manager, maybe an agent. Maybe you're going to go traditional publishing. Maybe you're not, but you still need someone to do the book cover. You need someone to do the editing. It,
Yeah.
it takes a full island, a farm, will you,
Mhm.
to get the book made. Now, what would you consider the biggest difference between your for-profit publishing company and your nonprofit writing avenue? Your it's basically a nonprofit to help writers and have
Yeah.
resources and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. The structure is very different. I mean, obviously, a small press is structured like a small press is. There are some similarities in the sense that, we have many different staff members and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But a nonprofit's, how do I want to put that? your nonprofit's main goal is the mission,
Yeah.
and although Inked has a very, very similar mission, um, in a nonprofit, all the money that you make goes back into that nonprofit,
Yeah. To
you
build
know,
it. Yeah.
yes, to build a nonprofit. So, I mean, that's one of the main differences. Um, the other one is a nonprofit can be much more broad. You have a for profit that's a specific purpose, to, make books, sell books, and on and on. Whereas a lot of nonprofits have multiple different objectives underneath their mission. So WriteHive has a mentorship program. We have a very huge community that, if you want to just ask, we have a couple professionals resident professionals.
Yeah.
So you can just kind of bounce questions off them, things like that. We have conferences. So we have many different ways to achieve the same mission. But that mission is kind of more broad and spread out, whereas a press just publishes books.
Yeah.
So
Well, also they reveal the word of the minds of those unheard, right? Now with the nonprofit, is there a membership fee or like an involvement fee? It's all
all
through
free.
sponsorships and donations.
Yes, we get all 100% of our money comes in from donations and sponsorships, and that kind of funds all of the stuff that we do. So it allows us to do. We have a sponsored writer award, which we actually just closed the applications on that, which gives $500 towards anybody that's needs help with their book expenses, whether they need an editor, they need a book cover, they need marketing funds, things like that. Money goes to all the background stuff, the overhead that we use, any transcripts, things that out there honestly just cost money. I mean, I wish it was like I can say I'm a nonprofit, give me everything for free, but the world doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So we do have to pay for a lot of the services that we use that we then pass down to the person who's either attending the conference or in the community or whatever, so that they can, use either the services or the product of the services that we provide.
Yeah, and you said something about that $500 award can go towards like things like editing. I heard that writers don't need editors; they can do it themselves.
I mean, I'm not going to go out here and say you absolutely need an editor. I will say you absolutely should get other people's eyes on your work, whether they are classified as an editor or they are a beta reader or they are a unbiased, friend or colleague. I do think you need somebody else's eyes on your work because we as people are biased. And I think
Oh
that
yeah.
my work is great and I know exactly what I want to say. That's exactly right on the page. And then somebody else is going to read it and go, I don't know what you meant by here because, 100% of our knowledge is in the brain, and what comes out on the paper isn't all 100% of that because we, leave stuff out that we think is either common sense or our brain just kind of glosses over because it's not something that we have in our conscious mind day to day.
Well, yeah, we understand the subtext and
Yeah.
the text. We know what's coming,
Yep.
and what has come. I always tell people, I go, I still have trouble deciphering what read and read is. When I see that on a page, did I spell it correctly? Did I not?
Yep.
So you need an editor to go. You got this one backwards.
Yep.
And also I create languages for my world. So like there's, Elven is a real language. Well, I created a language. So now I got to teach someone the language. Is the grammar correct? Is the spelling right? So it's a hassle. Before we get any deeper into the conversation, I'm going to ask you a question that I think relates to the subject that we're talking about as far as editing and things like this. In your opinion, what are some of the most common mistakes or shortcomings that you see in the work of other writers, and how can these issues be avoided or corrected?
One of some of the things that I see are using words like feel or, you know, there's a balance between show and tell.
Mhm.
There are certain, and finding that balance I found is very, very difficult. Your writing shouldn't necessarily be all show or all tell. And, there's cultural differences there that, in writing styles and things that obviously need to be considered. But sometimes you can create and unintentionally create that distance between the reader and the work when you use words like they smelled or they heard, instead just cutting out those kinds of words and just saying it because you already are, in that person's head, or whatever, depending on the point of view you're in.
Mhm.
So a lot of those things, it's fairly common because when you're telling a story. If I'm going to tell a story, I'm going to say Johnny heard this or what. So I think that in our minds, that's kind of maybe how we think of it because we are telling a story. So
Yeah.
you're going to tell the story and tell what Johnny heard and tell what, your characters heard, and I think that is also a cultural thing of, how we tell stories, so it kind of bleeds itself into our writing. And sometimes it works, and sometimes that maybe it may create too much distance between the book and the writer.
Yeah, and just for anyone listening, especially aspiring authors and stuff like that, it's okay during your first draft to throw in, they
Oh,
smell, they
absolutely.
heard, they saw, and then when you get to those moments, you have to realize, did the preceding paragraph or uh, uh, show that element, or something that I see a lot in books is characters will talk,
Hmm.
and then after their dialogue in the it'll actually say they were frustrated with each other, and it's like, yes, well, were they, like, did we just hear their frustration?
Yeah.
Do you need to and that's something to look for in your second draft while you're
Hmm.
doing a reread, because a reread uh you know there is going to come a time where they saw, but you could just describe what they're seeing, and now we
Yeah.
realize they saw, or something I do in my outline is, and this is just the extended outline, so it's not. I'll write, Dakota looks at Thomas, and to me, that means I need that moment to breathe. There needs to be a beat. There's an emotion that what has happened or been said emotionally affected that character. So,
Yeah.
so I need to go into them in that moment. So,
Yeah, and that is helpful too when you want to put emphasis on who is doing the looking. Then again, using that telling of, he looked at her, or she looked at him, or whatever, you know, that could be a good way, to kind of add some emphasis to something, and it does kind of take the camera lens back if that's what you're going for. I think the object there is just to be intentional about what you're trying to convey, and it sounds nitpicky because you go through your stuff, your work. Sometimes you kind of nitpick yourself as you go. It's
yeah,
like, was that the right word? What kind of camera lens was I going for there? Do I need to be closer? And it kind of hurts your brain sometimes to go through almost every paragraph and be like, and kind of see it in your head, and kind of move that camera lens back and forth based on how you're using those words. But I think it is very helpful to do that, even if you piece it out, and do a little bit at a time. You can kind of get the idea of how that story looks from, the reader's point of view.
yeah, and as I said, it's a outline, so it's okay to be so straight on, right,
Hmm.
right there. A matter of fact, all, and then turn it into story when you're writing the actual novel out, and going, how do I move through this feeling, and knowing that it's important, it's an important beat in the outline. But if you see that in your novel often, like
Yeah.
you said, you need some telling, you need some showing. But if you see that often, you have to say to yourself, I may be telling too much. And a rule that I learned through these interviews, and being in the writing industry for so long, is, showing is from the experience of the characters, whereas telling is the perspective of the author.
Hmm.
And so that's something you could say to yourself as a writer, especially anyone listening, is, how do I want my characters to experience this moment, or do I want to visually represent the moment as an author for those watching far away?
Yes, exactly.
Is showing and telling something that you struggled with coming up as a writer? And if so, what were some of the things that really helped you take control of that?
It was definitely something that I struggled with. And I think because I referenced like the storytelling, it's like that was why I had such a hard time because, I grew up with such oral storytelling of, different stories and so that's how I kind of wrote the stories down in my head first, and then, I got we had some critique partners and things like that that kind of just helped me go, you use this a lot. So once it was pointed out to me, I was like, those kinds of things. It's just now I couldn't unsee it, so
They broke
different.
what is it? What is it
Yeah.
from How I Met Your Mother, where they're like, you chew loud, and then like everyone like heard them chewing loud.
Yep.
There's a term for that. You break the illusion. But you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's why I think it's helpful for, to find somebody that you trust to bounce your work off of because they will find things that you overlook because, it's impossible to catch everything.
but when does critiquing become opinion? You know what I'm saying? Like there's a certain point where, for example, I personally don't like characters that have no motivation but they do cool things. Like I'm not really into that. I'm not. I know the cool factor outweighs logic, but there's a difference between the cool factor and just I want them to be able to do this thing. So there's no motivation. But some people are like, I just like the cool. I like Zack Snyder films. Someone might say that, right?
Yeah.
uh visually they're beautiful, but there's no through line to his movies. There's no motivation. So um when can somebody recognize the difference between critique, like an honest critique, and an opinion from their critique partner?
That that's a hard one because, it also depends on how your critique partner is phrasing their comments, and in looking at what they're commenting on and how they're commenting on, does this come from a point of opinion or a point um of unbiased critique?
Hmm.
A lot of and a lot of that comes from communicating also with the person who's critiquing your work. A lot of maybe beforehand, here's my story, and if my character is not going to resonate with you, then maybe they may not be the best person to give certain types of feedback. So or maybe they don't have an experience with, a certain events or certain, maybe
Subject
they
matter.
don't, yeah, or subject matter, or maybe they don't read mysteries and you write mysteries. So, you know, there could be some benefit there to, oh, you don't read mysteries. Let me know how this sounds from and focus on these kind of components, maybe not the elements of mystery, for example, because, you may want somebody who's more familiar with mystery and the components that go along to making a mystery in that kind of sense. So, it is give and take. I mean, you're going to have, you know, a lot of critique is opinion.
Yeah.
But you have, I guess it's, if you're stuck on a certain point of is this valid or is this not, sometimes communicating on a certain point, maybe it was you just, the context wasn't there. So they got something different out of it. And, maybe tweaking a few things would help that. So it all depends, and having conversations with a critique partner or an editor, whoever you're working with, to kind of go over which parts it would better help you when you get that feedback back to say, okay, these parts are opinion, I may agree, I may disagree, or whatever, and then kind of go from there.
Yeah, one of the things that I learned is that having multiple alpha readers and beta readers really helps, and then you can kind of go with the majority wins. If the majority are seeing a consistent
Yeah,
issue with something, then it's there. But if somebody, like for example, if someone says, you know what I would really like, I think these two characters need to have their relationship challenged, so you should put like a jealousy kind of angle on it. And you're like, oh well, I'm trying to show a healthy relationship and that their challenges are something else external, not
external.
internal.
Yeah,
And now you're dealing with that feels more
that may be a
opinion than
personal
critique.
preference thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And again, that also plays to what your intent is for the character. So if your intent is to show a healthy relationship, then there's going to be certain aspects that, you're not going to consider because it's not what you want, what message you want in your novel.
For me, I have LGBTQ characters, and since it's another world and stuff, it's another planet. I have two sons, so there's darker skinned individuals for obvious reasons. Two suns can really kill you from the radiation if not done correctly, and you know I I'll have people read, and they'll critique. They'll be like, there's like someone said once, there's not really a lot of gay people in the world. It's just something that we're. And I'm like, what? I was like, they've always been there.
Mhm.
It's just when you're not killed for saying you love someone of the same, you're a little bit more outspoken about it, and it's just interesting because like the way certain voices uh see the world and the way we experience the world kind of allows us to write stories that others can't. It's interesting when a critique partner does make note of those things, and it's like, yeah, but a gay relationship is, and I'm saying this slightly, is the same as a straight relationship. They love each other, they have dreams, they have aspirations, like on
Mhm.
that level.
Yeah.
Writing, it's a relationship, and for someone to be like, oh, there's, I think you have too much of that element in your story, and you go, why don't we say that about straight, like, but it's because their perspective lives in that. And I know that your publishing company does focus on giving voices to more LGBTQ, right?
Mhm.
So if I may, what is one of the bigger struggles of people looking at the products, the books, and associating it through that lens of critique, meaning like they're going, oh, it's a lesbian couple, or it's a this, and that's how they see the story instead of seeing the story. How do you deal with that?
Um, well, if to put it lightly, if they don't want a book that has, two queer characters as main characters in it, then that's not the right book for them. Um, you know, um, I think we we write, or our authors write a lot of books that represent them in some way, shape, or form. So we're not going to appeal to everybody, and that's okay. A lot of our audience is kind of resembles ourselves in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have an issue with, you know, oh, it's a queer couple, or, you know, oh, this is a black character, black author, black character story, then it's not the right book for you, and that's fine. I think we need to do more as a society to create more equality.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I think, to your point, we just want to exist as well, and our stories are just as valid. So the misconception that we're throwing queer stories in everybody's faces isn't exactly accurate, simply because, now there are more companies and agencies out there that recognize that there aren't enough stories
Mm-hmm.
from, marginalized communities, and now they're out there, and now everybody's going, oh, that's me, so they're getting the attention that they deserve. And you know when people sometimes see that and they go, well, what about the white stories and stuff like that, they're still there,
Yeah.
they're still making their money and all that stuff. But it's time that we kind of evened the playing field, for lack of a better word.
And
you know
I agree. I agree. They're just like a nonprofit. Like you have the $500 a reward to
Mhm.
authors. You can't just give that to somebody according
No.
to the rules of the nonprofit,
Mhm.
but it's available for all those involved in that nonprofit. And I
Mhm.
think that also applies to all areas of artist creative avenues. Like if you want to create a movie, it should just be available to you as an option that like, let's tell this story, and less like, hey, we're going to cut off all these stories and just tell that story, which would come into that argument. It's like, oh, well, white stories aren't being told now. Like what you're saying, they are
Mhm.
being told, but sometimes there's a feeling that certain genres or styles or quote unquote diversity is being pushed harder. And it's like, well, look, as long as the doors are open for anybody, I think that's the power of diversity. It's like,
Mhm.
well, we have, it just so happens these stories are just better. This
Mhm.
writer knows what they're, I'm feeling this writer. It happens.
Yeah.
Whereas in the past, the door wasn't open
Mhm.
for that voice to be heard, for it to represent itself.
Yeah.
Um, I do want to ask though. Uh, I guess this is more controversial because it's pushing back a devil's advocate kind of approach. This isn't particularly my perspective, but what do you do as a publisher when you reading material and it feels it just in your soul it feels like it's a cater to a movement and not a true story. Like like it's a good story. Like you're like this is well written, but there's just something about it. It feels like okay, they just put in the from the '90s they used to call it the token black guy, right? The token black guy.
Mhm.
Like, what do you do when you run into a good story that just in your soul is like this is catering too hard to something? And I think how do you deal with that?
Well, on a whole, we're looking for stories that are passionate stories, that where the author kind of really takes you by the hand and throws you into the story, whether you like it or not. Um, so if something feels out of place, it honestly depends on the rest of the story. I mean, that's not going to be something we don't address in the sense of, hey, you know, you have a character that doesn't have any agency but is there to exist, regardless of the age, gender, race, culture, or whatever of that character. you know a character that feels token is going to have be a character without agency.
Mm,
So it, you're going to address the fact that you have a character in a story that doesn't hold any purpose or agency in the story. you know um so it's we're looking for, I mean, and we're looking for stories, you know from marginalized communities. So,
mhm.
you know it's a hard question to answer, except for the fact that we want authentic stories. If your token characters are not authentic.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, oh, they cater to LGBT, so I'll have a gay character, and you're like, well, having a gay character isn't telling, it's not representation. That's just let me click the block. I got the box ticked off. All right, what else do I need? I need a strong female character. Okay, I got that. I need, whatever they feel the formula is, which the real formula is good stories.
Hmm.
Stories, like you said, that are authentic, that come from, tension and conflict is not about the surface level of the characters.
Yeah,
It's
sure.
literally about the internal and their external battles, but
Hmm.
not, like I'm a tall character, so I have to deal with tall things. Like that story is not interesting until you go into the person,
Yeah.
and I
Hmm.
and I think that for some writers starting out, they fall into that because I've spoken with writers where they approach a story on what sells.
Well, I mean, there is a part of what sells to it, but it's not everything.
Yeah, like it's like the niche, right? You don't want to do a niche that makes money unless you're passionate about it because you
Yeah.
have to do that niche then.
Hmm.
And I think that's the same thing. Like, I'm making the statistic up, but like, let's say like young adult romance is the top selling
Yeah.
book genre out there, or not area. Like, if I'm not passionate about writing young adult romance, I shouldn't write that book because if it sells, then I got to write another one.
Well, and you may not even like the writing process, of
Well,
writing it. you know
right? It's like, Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. It's like epic fantasy. Like if you're writing a 60 or 70,000 word epic fantasy, you are not writing an epic fantasy. You have to really write an epic
Yeah,
fantasy. There's like fantasy is one thing, but epic fantasy now you got histories, cultures,
mhm. It's a lot of
these
work.
uh, yes. Yes.
You you got to love the history and the culture, and whether it's your own off or based on something else. Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. So, I do want to go back to your journey as a publisher. And was this something where, and I'm saying this just to start the conversation, is this, but obviously I want you to correct me and direct me. Uh, were you and people around you having trouble getting your books published and you didn't want to go to self-publishing route? So you decided, which is usually how a successful business starts, is, well, if no one else is going to take a chance on us, we're going to take a chance on us. Is that sort of like the catalyst that led to the publishing company?
Um, Sort of, in a sense. I mean, I've always been frustrated with, the exclusion of marginalized communities, in many different things. Um, I think a lot of what went into starting the publishing company came just because I did a lot of social work in a previous lifetime. So, but
You still
and
kind of do it with writers.
I do, just in a very, very different setting. I kind of just took social work and just changed the venue.
Yeah.
Different party, as it were. So, and you know, when it came to talking to writers and things like that, there was very much a distinct gap, and it kind of pissed me off, to be quite honest, in a sense that there's so many good stories out there, but
Hmm.
they're not considered, marketable or whatever because, they're not the, your typical story. And I think that there's a lot of discrimination that goes into picking what certain stories sell sometimes. I mean, you have cultural differences and things like that that all play into, you know, what sells based on, majority and statistics and things like that. So, but just because something doesn't fit the norm or the mainstream doesn't mean it's not a great story,
Hmm.
So that was kind of my motivation for starting, Inked and Gray, was because those stories need a voice too, and they need, and joining that um, endeavor, I guess, for lack of a better word, um, you know, would be helping a community that does need somebody to go, hey, let's do this, we can do this, and kind of just empower everybody to go, no, you're talented, you have a great story, let's get it out there, there is an audience out there, and kind of just building that backbone for, authors and communities to kind of lift each other up,
Hmm. And then, so what you're saying is it had nothing to do with there were far too many vampire books out there. That's fair. That's good.
Yeah.
Continuing on with the publishing mentality, and it's difficult to be a publisher more than like how do we sell the book. It's like your job is to say no to people. Your job is to also say yes to people, but it's
Mhm.
also to help people. Like you're signing on people because you see something maybe in their first book that's not amazing, but it's there. Like you're like, I want to invest into this person,
Mhm.
and that's something you have to take those risks, right? But what happens when you come in place with a book that is just, this is a book, like this is a book that's going to really resonate, it's a strong book, and you publish it and it does really well, and then obviously you want the author to write another book, and they do, and then they come back and the book feels like not only a different author wrote it, but that clearly they had been writing the first book for several years and they were able to hone it to get their voice right, whereas this book, you can tell the same amount of effort wasn't put in. How do you have that conversation with an author, and what would that feel like, just for other authors to understand, like it's not personal?
No, it's not personal. And I think couching that conversation of, you know, that first book may have had 4 or 5 years of, work put into it and everything. And that's just talking through, where they see the story, what's going, where the story's at, and how we can kind of build that up and then build the different pieces. Maybe there's some connection to if it's a sequel, there's some previous connections and things like that, that we can kind of either explore, or if it's it depends, I guess, also on what it is, kind of focusing on where those gaps are, you know, and building up and filling in those gaps. I mean, I don't necessarily think it's would be a painful conversation in the sense of, like, we're all pretty easygoing. Like, we've
Yeah.
all been there. My first drafts suck. That's the way it goes. You know, Sometimes, you lose the vibe between the first one and then the second one, because you were on a roll, and then you're like, yes, it's done. And, then you go back and maybe it's hard to get back into that zone, So, it's just talking about where they see the book, where it's at now, and how we can kind of build it up. And I mean, that's most editing conversations anyway.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily that much different than, you know, we've acquired your book. We talk about the vision and, all of the things that, the author is aiming for and going for in that, and how we kind of bring that out. It's almost the same conversation, maybe a little bit more intensive if it needs more intense work. But again, it depends on what we're looking for, or,
Yeah.
where the author is looking for in terms of, this is where I see it.
Do you ever find your company ever find an urgency in the production of a novel? For example, again, using that, it took 5 years for the book to be great, and then they worked on a book for about a year, and it wasn't complete. Let's just put it that way. Is there a certain point where you're like, look, I know it's taken you 5 years to write a book. It's hard for us to invest 5 years into an author. Like, do you have those debates with yourselves or amongst the heads of the company as far as like continuing with an author?
No. And I say that because when we go into, an acquisition or a conversation, you know, between then and, say, that moment in time, life happens. I
Yeah.
mean, there's things like mental health and family issues, and, all of those things. And, when you make a promise and you commit to, an endeavor with an author, then you obviously saw something in them. And, if something happens where you need to alter expectations and things like that, then that's a conversation.
Mhm.
If the author feels that they no longer either want to publish the second book, or whatever the case, that ball is in the author's court at that point. So, we work with a lot of individuals, neurodiverse individuals that work differently, and we're going to adapt to that. I work differently. I'm not, you know, normal would be a bad word. I'm I'm neurodivergent myself. There we go.
Yeah.
So I work differently, and if there needs to be a modicum of respect for people's processes, people's lives, people's abilities, people's expectations, and those kinds of things. And those are things you go into in the first, those are the conversations you have in the beginning. So when, if this second draft comes around and, they're having kind of trouble with it, hopefully you have built that relationship enough to know and, kind of navigate moving forward.
Yeah, a lot of the things the theme you're talking about is communication. And for anyone listening out there, authors, uh, if you have an agent or a publisher, or you're working with anybody, including a friend, like if you're working together critiquing, if you are having difficulty communicating, you got to find a way within yourself. You got to really question yourself and work through that, because communication is how you get through and solve problems. And usually, just like Dakota just said, if you're upfront and discuss the altered route due to whatever life happens, she's going to work with you. Their company's going to work with you, and that's the power of communication. Is we don't necessarily feel like the outcome's always going to be positive because I'm not coming up on my end, I'm falling short. But people believe in people, and when we believe in people, we're not concerned that you can't do something. We're concerned that you didn't tell us in time.
Yeah, or what can we do then to what can I do to help? I mean, that's the goal, right? I'm here to be the support. So, tell me how I can be supportive. And those things change over the course of a the relationship.
Yeah, it's definitely, and it is a team. It is a team process, and like we said earlier in our conversation, no one is an island.
Mhm.
And if you think as an author, well, I'm the one writing the book, you're like, the book is the least important part of your journey, because if you finish a book and put it in the closet, it's not going to sell.
Mhm.
You need other people. I need to tell someone about it. I need the publishing company. I need a I need teams. I need marketing. I need so you need fans. The readers are literally other people, and you have to connect with them either through your works or what have you. Uh, as a publishing company, do you traditionally handle the majority of marketing, or do you, going in, let the author know, like, listen, uh, you're going to have to do the marketing. We're going to handle the distribution and the duplications and the publishing, but you have to handle the marketing. Is that something that's a
We're
part?
very collaborative, so we do marketing as well. But we also recognize that readers want to hear from the authors. I mean, that's just what we've seen in social media, period. So we support the author in doing marketing endeavors that they would like to do, as well as we do our own. It's very collaborative thing. So an author may say, hey, I want to do this like giveaway thing because my friend's doing this and we're going to do this, and I go, okay, what do you need?
Yeah.
We make sure they have what they need to do that. Or we say, hey, we're doing this collaborative thing, this is what we're going to do, is that okay? Is this something that you want to do? And here's our ideas, and we kind of go from there. So it's
Yeah,
very
absolutely. Yeah, and that's great. The collaborative environment is always going to be, and also the compassionate collaborative
collaborative.
environment is always going to be helpful. Something that has definitely been discussed in my circles, and like I said, I've been in this industry for over 20 years. I've taught writing. I've owned theaters and stuff like that, and been in the entertainment industry. And uh, a lot of times authors, they think if I get published, that's it, I'm going to be success. My career is going to blow up. All I got to do is focus on getting my book signed by a publisher. And but then they have that fear. They go, oh, the publisher gets more money than I do. They print the book, and I'm going to get $2 or $1, and the book sells for $20. Like, I'm getting ripped. Like, I'm doing all the work. But they don't realize, in the sense, the publisher has their fingers in all these avenues, and they have the connections, they have the time invested before that author even came into their periphery. And there's a whole process to being a publisher that warrants that justified split of
Mhm.
income. What would you say to educate those listening that don't understand or have never dealt with a publishing company, that kind of conversation? How would you educate them to go, hey, listen, we're not stealing from you. We have to pay our bills, or we can't afford to.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people also forget the cost to print books is expensive, and it's gone up. So the money made off of paperback books, or ebooks and your Kindles and Barnes and Noble and things like that, isn't exactly a lot. Out of that, $15-$20 per book, you're gonna see, oh, my math is horrible on the top of my head. You're going to see a couple dollars off of that book, right? And then it gets split the way it gets split. So on our end, that goes to pay for the time for people on the team, all of the marketing endeavors. It pays back for the book covers and all of those things, so that's where a lot of our money goes. It goes back into what we've already probably spent on the book itself, and then, time and overhead and things like that, so.
Yeah, but they wrote the book.
Well, and I do think, at least for Ink and Gray, our splits are very standard, for cross indie books and things like that. Yeah, they're, so we do different things like not marketing, merchandising and things like that. That and we also sell the books on our website, which I make more money selling the books off my website than I do through Kindle or Barnes and Noble. So things
the
like
profit
that.
margin you're talking about is much higher in you.
Yeah, so as a plug, if you like a book, buy it directly from either the small press or the author themselves. If they do it, it makes the author or the small press much more money, and then makes the author more money. So I don't remember where I was going with that, but plug. Buy books, support local artists, period.
Do you, when you, so if an author wants to sell the books themselves, I guess what you do is you print the book, send them, and then you charge them. They don't pay you up front, but they're charged, and they owe you that money, a smaller fee for the print. You charge them the print rate plus whatever, and then they could sell the book for however they want. Now, if they sell the book for, say, the book is $3, the print, right? Yeah. And they sell it for $20, which is $10 more than you're selling it on the website. Do they have to pay you a percentage of that increased markup, or
No. So how that works on the back end is usually your publisher will have a wholesale rate that's similar to what a bookstore would buy, and then the author buys those wholesale, technically, from the author or from the publisher. Yeah. So that's my percentage, and then the author keeps the rest.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So what you're charging them has a markup of itself to the prints. Oh, okay. All right. That's pretty fair to them too, because now, but again, like in the music industry, sometimes like bands would get tickets and they go, you have to buy the tickets in advance, and they'd sell you like 100 tickets, whatever. And that's $250. But then you get to the door and they're selling the door tickets for $10, but you had to sell your tickets for $25 to make money. And like that became a big thing in the community of musicians, because they're like, no one wants to buy my tickets because the day of the show is cheaper, And so it's just interesting because like an author could kind of almost turn that around on you and charge a little bit more. But I think in person, it would make more sense. Like if they're doing a book signing, there's like a novelty to it. So like I could charge a little bit more for the book or something.
Yeah, especially if you're signing it or whatever. That's up to the author.
Yeah. What else did I want to talk about that? Because you said a lot of stuff and it was all intriguing. Now, when it comes to pricing a book, okay, how can an author approach that, especially if they come to you and they go, look, I have this book, and they did their marketing analysis, but they don't really know how to price their book to give you a guesstimate, even though you're probably going to end up changing the price of the book. But if they kind of know what they're talking about, what is some advice in pricing a book, or at least presenting a book to you saying, hey, I think this book could go for X amount of dollars and it's about this and this and this?
Well, I mean, definitely do your research. Look at what other books are out there, what they're selling for, their page length, their genre, things like that. And, kind of do your own market analysis. There's a lot of resources out there for, how to price a book. And there's also and a lot of those advices will tell you, you may have to alter the price once or twice just to get it right. And that's fair too. Just make sure you do your research and you start off with an informed guess first, or an informed opinion first, and then kind of work your way through that.
So $100 is a good start for a 30-page poetry book. it's always interesting, like, and I want to know if your company does. You have the nonprofit, which sort of like is it not sort of like it is. It's a resource for authors, not only that are assigned to your publishing company, but other authors, I'm assuming, can be a part
Absolutely.
of the mission. Um, I worked with a few agents in the past where they would hire me to basically educate their writers, their authors, and be like, "Hey, how do we market our books? How do we do this? How do we do that?"
Mhm.
Uh, has that ever been something that, as a model, I'm not pushing I don't do that anymore. Just, I'm semi-retired. Uh, is that something that Inked in Gray had thought about, where like you hire a consultant on marketing, and they they're available for your authors, or do you present them to your authors, et cetera, et cetera? Has that ever been something that has been a part of your model and worked?
No, but we as ourselves do knowledge sharing with our own authors. So, there is different, like, here's some marketing strategy techniques, let's look at what marketing you do have, whether, regardless of whether all their books are with Inked or not, like, the author as a brand is, somebody that we work with, so we do factor in those other books into consideration, because, if you like one book, then you may like others. So in helping the author as a whole, whether whole brand, whole marketing or whatever, that's going to help them, and that's our goal, right? So, questions that they have about marketing and things like that, we're there with them. We're not just going to go, hey, here you go market, or just here, do this, and give them a list.
Good
There's
luck.
going to be some reasoning behind it, and then the goals and intents, right? So, hey, our goal or intent with this is to do X, Y, and Z, and this is why we think this will work, and give suggestions and things like that. So, there is a knowledge sharing component that goes into it, you
Yeah,
know so
and
we're not
there's a
hoarding all
school
the
of,
knowledge.
yeah, you got to share the knowledge.
Yeah,
It's a pool that we swim in of knowledge,
exactly.
and we come out clean and ready.
Mhm.
Um, there's a school of thought where, especially for new authors, they focus on marketing their book. They're like, I'm going to just push my book, and they forget about themselves as authors, and to create a longevity to their brand or their emotional connection with their audience. I.e., Stephen King, the smallest part of a Stephen King cover is the title of the book. The largest element of the book cover is his name, Stephen King. Or usually it's just Big King and Stephen is small. Um, do you follow or believe in that school of thought where uh, it should be author marketed first and book second? Because you're not writing the same book over and over.
Yeah.
You're writing different books.
I mean,
Well,
there is a lot of weight to it, in the sense of you're marketing what an author represents. So if they're a sci-fi author or whatever, so you're marketing, you know, so and so, the sci-fi author, so they kind of go hand in hand. I mean, obviously it's more difficult if the author writes two different genres, that, say if it's mystery and sci-fi, then there's some creative marketing going on there,
yeah.
but you know it very much is brand marketing with a product, as well as the brand also being the author, and the brand also being the book. So it kind of plays hand in hand.
Well, yeah, the book itself should have a brand, and then the author
Yeah.
should have a brand, and then there's the
Yeah.
brand of the publishing company, and there's a
Mhm.
lot of brands going on. Basically, you'll be on the toilet bowl for a while with all that brand, and but to add to that, when an author is starting out, though, especially an author that's not going to write a series where they're going to write multiple books, and maybe they're all the same genre, but they're just different stories from different perspectives. What would your advice be to an author that is starting out about focusing on which brand? Should they focus on building their author brand instead of focusing on their first book only?
um Maybe a little bit of both, in a sense of, you do want to market yourself as a brand first, and then the, hey, my brand has a product called X book. Especially if they haven't had anything out prior to, building yourself up as a brand? So what do you stand for? What, what can we expect out of you as a brand and things like that, and then building that brand loyalty, and then from there introducing the book.
Yeah, like for example, Nike is Nike. Just do it. Like that's
Yeah.
their brand. They're about being right, but they also sell different styles of shoes, from Air Jordans
Mhm.
to, tennis shoes, and that's something I think authors should look at. And obviously, correct me if I'm wrong. Where you look at other major companies and how they have a brand, and then they have all these smaller brands, because Air Jordan is a brand in itself, but it's attached to Nike, which is also associated with the Michael Jordan brand. And
Yeah.
so there's three. But like you're saying, if you can create a strong foundation to the lack of better term, the mother brand, because these,
Hmm.
the right, and then you umbrella that over smaller brands and allow those smaller products, which is a book, to have its own brand itself, you create a strong relationship between the two,
Yeah.
a cohesive,
Yeah, because
synergetic relationship.
to take Nike as the example, like every one of their shoes still kind of represents the main brand.
Mhm.
You're not going to see. I read an article. I don't quote me on this, but there's Nike has core values. I believe they're like passionate, motivated, determined. There's four different values or whatever. So every one of their products does kind of have that feel to it. So even though they're individual brands and individual, whatever they produce, shirts, t-shirts, shoes, they still have that air and tone about them, which connects them all to each other.
Yeah. And is this something like, if you're dealing, I shouldn't say dealing, if you're working with an author that you signed, and you have this discussion with them, and they're very hesitant, because a lot of authors are introverts, right? And they're like, I don't want to be, I just want my book to speak for me. I have no interest in being out there, even with a student. I don't even like, I want my name very small in the book. I just want my words to be what sells the book. Does that make the process harder for you as a publisher?
Um, it makes it, you just have to be more creative, so harder maybe. But it just, you're going now towards more organic forms of branding and things like that. So it changes the approach,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So no, I mean, I have authors that are not going to get up in front of TikTok with their face and dance, and
Why not?
not something that I will do either. So I can relate, but there's different things that you can do, you know, that foster your introvertedness, or whether you have social anxiety and stuff like that, then there are other avenues and other options, and we just kind of look into what those are, and what they're willing to do, and kind of go from there.
Stephen King is a great example where, like, he's basically has agoraphobia, right? So he tries not to go out and do interviews, and occasionally he'll go to colleges, and like there's that, he does the thing with R.R. Martin and stuff like that. Um, but he talks about how he had to earn that. He had to earn the right to not have to go out and do interviews and like get in front of people. Like he had to build his brand to where his brand kind of is the train. The train pulls him along. Now he doesn't have to go and push it. And one of the things I got from that, and again, this is just an option as an we're just having a discussion, is that he was stating that you had to give the train enough fuel to move itself across the tracks, and once that happens, you get to relax in the caboose a little bit, because it's self-sufficient. And some authors, I know I deal with a lot of clients in the beginning where they're hesitant on the concept of putting work in because they just want to write books. And I try explaining, I go, that's going to be where you're going to end up, but you're not Brandon Sanderson. You can't write a book and and you put it on
It's not going to
Kickstarter.
magically sell. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, as again, it's devil advocate to push back on that mentality. Are you as a company hesitant to sign someone that doesn't want to put the work in beyond writing a book?
Um, No, it does depend on where they see their book and what they can commit to, and if we can, come to some sort of agreement on who does what and things like that, then you know then that it is what it is. It definitely does depend on you know what everything kind of looks like and shakes out to be.
Well, yeah. What you're saying, and again, correct me if I'm
You
wrong.
know,
It's basically, you don't want to push people into being uncomfortable or doing things they're
no,
not necessarily appeasing. And I'm not advocating to do that. I'm just talking about a train of thought and
yeah,
a process, an option. Um, in that same scenario, and I'm asking these questions because I've had these debates with people in a larger group where like we all had different perspectives, and some people were like, no, my book is going to make the book is going to sell, and I don't like it's that good. And you're like, no book is that good, like like you can't just write a book and put it on the table. Like it's just there's no way that's going to sell, right? um what about a book from an author that is like that, and you work it out, and that book actually blows up, and they have an opportunity to be on, say, like, oh wow, I haven't. There's really no news I watch anymore. But like, let's say,
enter
like,
popular newscast here.
yeah, and they're like, hey, we want to do an interview with your author about this book. It's top seller and blah blah blah. And you create that opportunity, and they say no. How does that reflect the relationship that that larger opportunities are going to basically fall to the wayside?
I mean, to be fair, it is their choice whether they decide to do those things or not. Maybe there is a different avenue that we can look down. So and again, not to force anybody to do anything that they don't want to do, but is there another way where you can do the interview instead, or something like that? Some sort of accommodation, because is this desire to not do those kinds of things, where is that coming from? Is it just a stubbornness of not wanting to, or is there something else behind it where we can make some sort of different accommodation?
Yeah, like how can we work together on
Yeah,
this, because this is a big opportunity and it will help with sales, and you want to just be a writer, so this will fuel your ability to just be a writer because people will put a face to the
yeah,
name. um and I think that's also important too. Like I like where your mind is at, where it's like, look, there are these opportunities, but also there are people.
yes,
You
exactly.
know?
you
And
know
like,
yeah,
you
yeah,
must do this. Like, well, I just have a book.
right.
Have you ever and then we'll get to the last question after this, but have you ever uh, like found a book or an author that they're not an author as in like I want to be an author. They're an author as in like this is their pastime. This is like their therapy as they write. But you found the book and you're like, this book is amazing, and you want the book and you want to be like, we want to represent this book, and they're just like, nah, I just I just like writing. Like I don't want anyone to read. Like I don't care if anyone read. But they print the book out. They spend money on a cover, and uh, have you run into situations like that where these like Renaissance people?
I have not actually, no. Most people that send their subs in want to be published, so
No, I'm saying like like let's say you have a friend and like you read, they go, hey, they go, oh, you wrote a book, and they're like, yeah, it's just something I do on the side. You're like, could I read it? And they're like, I guess, yeah. And you're like, this is the most amazing thing. Why can I publish this for you? And they're like, nah, I just don't care about that stuff.
probably say that about all of my friends. You know, but it it's their own thing, and you have to kind of respect that. So
Yeah, that's what my dog tells me about teaching him like circus tricks. He's like, "No,
mhm.
Dad, I just do them at home. I do the spin around, I do the lay down." I was like, "We could bring you to the circus," and he's like, "No, Dad, there's not
No.
enough treats for that." And
Hmm.
but I told him he needs to get a job. He's been 9
Right.
years doing nothing. He just lays around and be cute, and makes me
Hmm.
love him. He's like, baby. Okay, anyway, uh, so this brings us to the last question of the day. I ask everybody this question. This is season three's question of the day. Let me read it. What is one piece of advice you discovered about writing, either through someone else or yourself, that completely changed the way you approach the writing process? Dakota.
Um, I mean, I think I recently found a passion for just writing in the sense of, I know you don't like swears, but fuck around and find out, and that's kind of helped my creative process in a sense, I'm a I'm a pantser with a side of plotter kind of, like I have a general direction and then I just kind of wing it,
Mm-hmm.
you know. The messy part is when you wing it for too long, you have to figure out why you did certain things. um so I've kind of just started breaking off my, screw around and find out things into different scenes and stuff, so that, if I want to continue it into something else, it's a separate document. So, or in Scrivener, like it's a separate chapter and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And organizing everything through there. And it's kind of allowed me just to kind of be more creative for the sense of being creative without having to stick to the plot line that you may or may not change anyway. Because I'm a pantser and that's what you do. So I think finding ways to find joy in just writing to write without maybe in the same world without actually following the plot has also kind of led to different, like, oh, I like that, but not in this sense. I'm going to put it here, so it kind of gives me like, just play, like, like a sandbox kind of.
Yeah, you got to play in the sandbox.
Yeah. So I've kind of created like a play in the sandbox kind of document that I in Scrivener, so that I just kind of play around when I kind of need to, when I don't really know what to write. So I'm just going to play around.
So you let the zero draft kind of pull you along through the process of discovery, and then when you find things you like, you kind of go, bloop, and then you. Bloop.
Yeah.
That's a great way of approaching it, especially for someone who's a pantser, but also likes a little bit of organization, but also, and that's the thing about writing, and authors definitely should pay attention to this. Is like, it doesn't have to be what you write.
Yeah.
Like, you can't be like, well, I wrote this, so I can't really change it.
Yeah.
I'm stuck with this. Like, you're allowed to not only throw it out, but you're allowed to change things. And as Stephen King, not that I'm a huge Stephen King, I was just he's good advice. He goes, sometimes you just have to throw a monster in the room to make something happen.
Yeah. And I think having it in a completely separate draft, like it's not even my zero draft. Like I have a zero draft and 14 ones thereafter, but it's just a sandbox kind of.
Oh, I see.
So I don't. It helps my brain separate between because when you write a zero draft, you're like, well, I don't want to change something because then I have to change everything. So I don't even put it there anyway, because if I don't use it, that's cool. If I do use it, that's also cool, because I'm going to rewrite the whole damn thing anyway. So I think keeping it separate on the document also separates it in my brain, that I can have more flexibility because I'm just screwing around.
Yeah.
So
you ever go back because like certain things got mixed together, and you're like, who's Jacob?
Right? Names change halfway through, so that's why the sandbox helps sometimes, because it's like it's all contained in there, and I didn't change the character's name 3 different times in my zero draft.
Yeah. Now, I want to end it, but just for people, just for the fun of it, how hard is naming characters? Let's be honest.
It's a pain in the butt. Yeah, it definitely is.
You got to go to names.com and be like, what would I name my child?
Generator and everything.
Are you a fan of people who just throw letters at the page and whatever falls in place, you're like,
I mean, I'm a fan of ones that you can kind of sound out. If not, then I just have a picture in my head and I have no idea how to pronounce it. And please don't make me.
It's one of those you read and you're just like, I'll just pass that one over. I know what that symbol is. I just don't know what it's.
Exactly.
Well, Dakota Rayne, thank you so much for coming on the Right Mindset podcast. Why don't you let the audience know where they can find you? And, obviously, if you have something coming up, you could throw that out there too.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to throw out the WriteHive conference, which tickets are on, I say on sale, but they're free. Donations appreciated. Our The conference is June 9th through 11th, and you can get tickets now on WriteHive Con. So spell it WriteHive, WriteHivecon.org, and check out the speakers and workshops we have available and things like that. That's what I would like to pitch. You can also find WriteHive on Twitter at @write_hive. If you want to follow Inked in Gray, my Twitter handle is at Inked in Gray. Inked in Gray Press is at Inked in Gray Pub, PUB on the end of it. Website is inkedingray.com, spelled just like it is on the screen. And you could hit us up there, hit us up on the WriteHive Discord as well. All the information for that is also on the WriteHive website. So yeah.
All right.
That's
And when are the dates again? June. What is
June
it? June
9th through 11th. So it is a Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
All right. And anyone listening, that's for 2023. So if you're enjoying this episode in 2026, you have missed.
And there will be new dates for that.
That's right. There'll be new ones. All right, Dakota, I'm going to do my final thoughts. Thank you again for really being a guest and telling us a little bit about the process, because not everyone knows about it. They just assume, again, if I get published, I'm going to be amazing. But I'll talk to you soon. All right, everybody. So final thoughts today. Uh, you know, Dakota brings up a lot of great points, and I love her perspective. And that's the thing, when we're working with other people as well, just our teams, not even working with the publishers, you have to realize that there are certain things they are willing to do and not willing to do. And I think that's a good subject to take away from this episode is, when you're taking on a career as an author, there are going to be things that you have to do, but the variable, the way you present it or approach it, can be your way. It can, you like, networking is something you have to do, but how you network is, there's so many variations to that, and you have to find what makes it comfortable for you. And when opportunities come up to you, you don't have to always take them, but you do need to find ways to make it profitable for your comfortability, because you want a longevity as an author. And working with team members is the same thing. And through communication, which was another thing we brought up, is so valuable to building and developing and cultivating relationships, that if we communicate our boundaries, and by the way, letting someone know your boundaries is not an attack on them. It's not saying they are doing it, but it's okay to represent ourselves and what we are and what we are not comfortable with. And as your author journey continues, you're going to learn what works for you and what doesn't work for you. But there's also something else that Dakota said that I really loved, is sometimes you want to play in the sandbox, because we don't always know what we are capable of. So if there's something that exists that you've never tried, find a safe environment, a safe way, maybe in the matrix, as one might say, where you can play in that sandbox and learn your strengths or learn things that you didn't know about yourself. Because through discovery, just like a story, you're going to find the character that is you when it comes to telling your stories. All right. With that, as always, you got to keep developing the right mindset. I love you. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time. Bye.